Hello everybody, Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report, Monday's edition, broadcasting from beautiful Irvine, California, on the one-year anniversary of our show. And boy, we could not have a more special guest today. I'd like to welcome Peter Navarro to the show. Peter, longtime assistant to President Trump, with him from start to finish, and author of a new book, In Trump Time, a Journal of America's Plague Year. Welcome to the show, Peter.
You know, you're right in my old hometown there. I was at UC Irvine for going on 25 years, but stuck here in the DC swamp. And tomorrow's a big day. The In Trump Time book is debuting tomorrow, and it has an important mission. I want to get to the bottom of what happened on November 3rd, what happened on January 6th, and what happened with Fauci and the Chinese Communist Party in that Wuhan bioweapons lab, which, by the way, is behind me here. We can talk about that if you like.
Peter, let's start off with it, because you were with the president from the beginning when all the news came out about what was happening with the virus back in January, February, and when it became full-blown international sensation into February 1st to March. Give us your thoughts, because you were with the president basically all the time. You helped formulate the policies. You worked on the Defense Production Act. And you, along with some other key people in the White House, were instrumental in Operation Warp Speed. Give our audience some background, because you were there really with the president all the time.
Well, interestingly, I was one of only 3 senior White House officials to be with the president from the 2016 campaign all the way to the end of what we like to call his first term. But what's interesting, of the 3 people who were there, I was the only one who really was actively involved in fighting the pandemic. This behind me is where it all started. It's the Wuhan Institute of Virology. It's a P4 bioweapons lab run by the Chinese Communist Party and the People's Liberation Army. And what's interesting about this, and as I detail in the In Trump Time book, Tony Fauci, the supposed saint and savior of everybody in America here, was actually intimately responsible for funding this lab, as well as funding the gain of function experiments, which likely led to the pandemic. And the In Trump Time book begins go to chapter 2, because it's Fauci. That's where I first see him. It's January 28th, 2020. I'm on full alert at that point, because years earlier I'd written a book about how China would likely create a viral pandemic and kill millions, right? So I'm watching the intel come in from Wuhan. I'm watching the crematoria burn, and President Trump tasked me to go to the iconic Situation Room on that January 28th day and convince the coronavirus task force to support his proposed travel ban on China. We wanted to take down the flights coming in from China. And so I get to the sit room. It's the afternoon. I walk in, and we got the acting chief of staff Mulvaney in the end of the table. He's chairing it. I love Mike Pompeo, but I had one of his buffoons at my left shoulder. This guy, total globalist. The other end, the Orville Redenbacher doppelganger in Dr. Robert Redfield, more bumbling bureaucrat I've never seen. He's the head of the CDC, right? And Azar's sitting over there, the Secretary of Health and Human Services. I knew I was going to have trouble with all 4 of them, right, for different reasons.
Right.
But this guy sitting across from me, Mark, this little guy with these round glasses, little smile or smirk on his face, I couldn't tell which. Within 2 minutes, I'm in a violent argument with this guy. Didn't know he was a saint, didn't know he walked on water, didn't know he was the high priest of science. Right. And he's trying to tell me that travel bans don't work. And I'm going, dude, I did say, dude, I did do it. It's like, you mean to tell me you got 20,000 Chinese nationals coming in every day, some of them from Wuhan, lit up like a Christmas tree with virus, and you're saying, bring them on in? And he kept like Flaubert's parodies going, travel bans don't work. And I knew right then that this guy thought he was smarter than he was, which is always a problem. But I also knew he was going to hurt the president. I knew he was going to hurt this country. And the thing that was so interesting about that day, even though the president and I would prevail over Fauci on that particular issue and save millions, good thing we didn't listen to that dude.
Oh, no question. No question.
The real thing that happened that day for me that's significant, knowing what I know now and detailed in the In Trump Time book, was not the lie that Fauci told to Congress about gain-of-function experiments, which, by the way, turn a harmless bat virus into a human killer.
Right.
The lie of omission was, look, at that point in time, end of January, Fauci already knew
he did
that virus came right from there, that it was a deadly bioweapon, and that it was genetically engineered. Why do I say that? He got an email from a researcher at Scripps Institute up the coast from where you're sitting, saying that the thing was likely genetically engineered. Fact one. Fact two, Fauci knew that the virus first surfaced within yards of this bioweapons lab. And fact three, Fauci, behind the back of President Trump in 2017, lifted the ban on gain-of-function experiments, which basically were used likely to create what we now know as the pandemic. So the lie of omission, here's the thing. This man belongs in prison. The lie of omission was not telling the president, not alerting me and the task force that there was a high likelihood that the virus came from here. And what did Fauci do? He didn't tell us. I never sat in a meeting where Fauci was forthcoming about any of this. Okay, none of this. Instead, he covered it up. He used these cutouts, these fools like Peter Daszak at the Eco Health Alliance to actually orchestrate a campaign, a letter writing campaign to make people believe this thing came from nature and the Chinese Communist Party had no fault in it.
Well, so, everybody knows the Chinese Communist Party was involved up to their ears on this situation, yes. Peter.
Yes, yes. And you know, this is, I call this the Fauci wing of this building. You know, in the basement, there's the crazy bat ladies, Xi Jinping. I mean, this is like insane, yeah, what Fauci did. I mean, it was like the height of hubris. He funded those experiments because he thought he could play God. The underlying ideology was, let's create a really dangerous virus. Then we can create vaccines to cure the virus. And that way, if the virus ever surfaces, we'll have the vaccines. Well, never did it occur to Fauci that the virus they might create would escape before a vaccine got created. And that's what happened. And if anybody watching the show who thinks Fauci's a good guy, please read the In Trump Type book. If you don't believe me, by the end, I'll give you double your money back, because this guy's got to go down.
And Peter, the media basically anointed this guy the darling of everything as the coverage of the president, and you and him talked about this because I've heard you talk about it, 90% plus negative coverage of the president. And on the other hand, Fauci was glorified as a saint. How in the world did that narrative get to be that way, Peter?
Well, Jeff Zucker, who runs CNN, I really call him out during the In Trump Time book multiple times, but he, along with the Democratic Party, had a strategy, and it was pretty simple. It's like, blame Trump for the pandemic, not the Chinese Communist Party. Right. Use Fauci to elevate that message and make it so that every time Fauci contradicted the president, that would basically elevate Fauci and push the president down. And they played that like a violin. And I told the boss twice early on to fire Fauci. It was like Churchill talking about Hitler and the Nazis, strangle that baby in the crib. Right. I don't blame the boss for not listening to me. I was a trade guy, right? What do I know, right? But Fauci had on the other side all the healthcare bureaucrats, Azar, Redfield, Hahn at the FDA. But here's who I would fault. I fault Mulvaney, the chief of staff, and the press corps, because they were telling the president, "Oh, you can't fire Fauci. He's too much. You'll too much blowback." I was like, no. Just lance that boil. Do it now. And we didn't, and the rest is history. And now Fauci is like, he's telling 6-year-olds to get a vaccination. It's insane. And Peter, look at the damage this is doing now. These vaccine mandates, the first responders, police officers, nurses, doctors, airline pilots, stewardesses, etc. People are saying, to hell with this. I'm just going to leave my job. And all that traces back to this, what I call the Democratic propaganda machine. The CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, etc. It's all the propaganda arm of the Democratic Party, and all this stuff has been fostered by what happened in. Again, you look at what the president actually did with your advice and others.
You know, Operation Warp Speed, therapeutics. I mean, everything that they possibly could have done, and your responsibility in the Defense Production Act, getting, I remember at the time, ventilators out to people. That was the hottest thing in the world. Trump can't get the ventilators out. We ended up with more ventilators. We ended up exporting them, Peter. So give everybody a little perspective, because you guys really put the effort forward, and a lot of people could see the effort, but the media just constantly, I mean, no matter how good you guys did, it was all, no, Fauci's right, Trump's wrong, they don't know what they're doing. Give us some perspective on that. That had to be a little frustrating for you.
There's a great chapter in the In Trump Time book called Kill the Chicken, Scare the Monkey. Okay, it's a Chinese proverb, and it refers to the fact of how as policy coordinator for the Defense Production Act with the president, cracked down on General Motors. That's the chicken, right? And the monkeys were all the other corporations who were trying to dodge their responsibility during the pandemic. And when we issued an action against them, which I describe in the In Trump Time book chapter, we were able to do one of the miracles that I report in the book, which was to stand up a ventilator factory in 17 days.
Yep.
17 days we got that up.
That's amazing.
I mean, they couldn't even do that in World War II, the way when they were transforming our industrial base into tanks and planes and things like that. And you know, it's like, it was a beautiful thing, because with the help of UPS, then I was able in 3 days to get those ventilators rolling off the thing into hospitals in Chicago and Gary, Indiana, and across the Midwest. But you know, more broadly, the In Trump Time book, one of the key chapters is early on, where I take you inside the White House on February 9th, 2020, where I would begin, with the help of a great character in the book, a guy named Dr. Stephen Hatfield, a series of memos that would jumpstart everything you mentioned, the vaccine, the therapeutics, the PPE, and everything like that. Right. And one memo on February 9th, I write this thing, very short memo, but it's very powerful. It says, look, if we start right now on this where it wasn't called Operation Warp Speed, we used the hockey analogy, like multiple shots on goal at the time. So we do this now, we can have a vaccine by October or November. Okay, now think about that. Mm-hmm. That was literally in Trump time, which is to say as fast as possible. It was like a third of the time it usually takes, right? And I was convinced we could do it, because I understood Donald Trump, his organizational culture, the In Trump Time, do it quickly and smart. And I was right on there. That's exactly what we got. But there's two things to say about that. One is that I had to fight Fauci all the way. And there's a funny story in the book about how, after I announced that and went on TV and said, yeah, we can do this, Fauci used his leaking contacts to get Maggie Haberman to go on CNN and basically say, like, get Navarro off TV and put Fauci on more, right? That's how
I know it happened. Absolutely, it did. You were fighting
megalomaniac. But the other thing to say about it, and this is really important, it's like, never did I dream, or did the president dream, that when we were pushing the vaccine forward, that it would be used as a weapon to steal people's jobs, right? I mean, I'm not anti-vax. I helped create the damn thing, but it's for senior citizens who have a high risk of mortality. It's for people with comorbidities. It's not for 6-year-olds. It's not for pilots and truck drivers and Marines and SEALs. It's certainly not for children and teenagers. But the world, according to Fauci, that's what. Look, that man is dangerous. He wants to jab your 6-year-old. He wants to put masks on kids in schools, have them breathe carbon monoxide. He doesn't know anything about science. And every time I confronted him in the In Trump Time book, it's like, it was over the whole course of a year, he was wrong. I was right. He was the scientist. I was the economist, but I knew the science better than he did.
And Peter, let me ask you this. Let me ask you one thing about this. No one thought you could get that vaccine developed in the short time frame that you did. From the time you started the project, it was like 10 months, and all the, quote, experts were saying it's going to be 2 years before you can have something like this.
And CNN dumped on us. New York Times dumped on us. Fauci said it couldn't be done. And one of the best chapters for the policy wonk folks, the people who are business people or public policy experts, is a description of how we actually did it. It's a little technical, but we went from what's usually a sequential process over 2.5 to 3 years, where you find the candidates and you test them, and then only then do you go to mass production, right? Instead of doing that sequential thing, we did it all simultaneously. So we had like 6 or 8 candidates, and I said, look, in these memos, it's like we're going to be ready to mass produce every single one of those, not knowing beforehand whether any of them would succeed, but we would damn well be ready if they did. Right. And our view as an economist was it was worth the money. Spend a few extra $1 billion on the front end, that we wouldn't cost us trillions on the back end. And that's how President Trump did it. And it's a beautiful thing. But again, we never imagined this thing would become a weapon economically or in the culture wars. I mean, it's just like you go into New York City right now, and it's like a fascist Chinese prison. It's you can't move without a mask and a vax card. It's like, what kind of America? And it's bad science.
It's bad science. And look at those business owners in New York. They had to endure having their businesses shut down. And now that their businesses are open, they're making them show their proof of vaccination before they can serve their customers. Yep. Peter, that's insane policies. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But listen, I'll tell you on behalf of our audience, the work that you and the president did in getting this vaccine out in 10 months happened to come out right after the election, of course, which is a perfect segue into our next topic. But that has resulted in countless lives being saved on the efforts that you and the administration did. And so you need to be applauded for this stuff versus how the propaganda arm of the Democratic Party treats you. Anyhow, let me move on for the sake of time. We go into the 2020 election. Peter, 6 states, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, and then the Great Blue Wall. Give our audience your perspective, because you've identified a lot of issues, 6 major states, numerous problems. Talk to because our audience is really interested in hearing your thoughts on this.
Look, the short version of this is that the election was stolen. There's a great chapter in the book about how 2 weeks after Election Day, when the Trump campaign failed to do its due diligence to fight this thing, I went in, put on my big boy Harvard pants, and went through thousands of pages of documents and discovered that the Democrats had stolen the election, not by any single method, but I called it death by 1,000 election irregularities. And that's where we stand today. And one of the missions of the book is really to get to the bottom of that stolen election. And what happened in particular also on January 6th to prevent President Trump from getting a good read on this. And I just got to I hate to do this, but I give you a couple minute warning here, or I got to move on here. But and I hate to do that because I love this show, but that's kind of the short end of that.
Peter, on the 1-6, I mean, in ranked order of importance, when you ask the American people what are the issues that they most are interested in, the 1-6 doesn't even rank in the top 20. And yet every time Biden gets into political hot water, where pick your poison, CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, etc., they try to regurgitate these stories about what happened on January 6th. And again, when something doesn't even, folks, that issue is lower than climate change, of which Biden barely was able to keep him stay awake at the recent conference. Peter, the American people, they've moved on past this, but you've got Democrats and where you are in the swamp just trying to regurgitate because Biden is in such trouble in the administration, sitting there with a 38 to 40% approval rating.
Well, in Trump time, whiskey straight, no chaser. If you want the definitive insider's view of that, and there is a big reveal about January 6th that will blow the Democrats out of the water. And I can't thank you enough for listening to me today, and from Irvine, no less, my old hometown.
Well, that's great, Peter. And I got to tell you something. The comments, folks, go out and get this book. Also, Peter, talk about the audio version of it too, because you've got the audio piece with a lot of good conservative commentators and people you worked with in the White House.
Yeah, I was surprised nobody else has really done this, but I narrated the book myself, but I also brought in a lot of voices. Steve Bannon's on it, Corey Lewandowski kind of steals the show in one chapter. The boss has a nice cameo. Victor Davis Hanson, Doc Hatfield. It's really a treat to listen to. It's as much a dramatic historical production as it is just a straight book read.
Peter, what's your relationship right now with the president? How often do you talk to him, and give any thoughts on what he's going to do coming up post 2022?
I'm there when he needs me. We talk when he needs me, and it's all good.
Great. Well, Peter, I got to tell you something. I know we have a lot going on. I know your time is precious, but thank you for joining us today. Folks, go out and get this book, get the audio version too. Peter Navarro, he's not only spent 20 years at UC Irvine, he's got a PhD from Harvard. He served the boss faithfully for 4 years, and I'm going to share this with you, folks. Unlike a lot of people that write books and they come out with these tell-alls, Peter Navarro is an ally of President Trump. He will support President Trump, and if Trump decides to run again, folks, I guarantee you Peter Navarro is going to be right there by his side.
All right, Navarro out.
Thanks, Peter. Appreciate everything.
Bye-bye.
Okay, folks, so in some other news, okay, that was great having Peter on the show. Listen, a lot of dysfunction happening over the weekend in this Biden administration. You know, we have a situation here where they've got this monstrosity bill out there, $3.5 trillion. Now it's 1.75. You saw a lot of finger pointing back and forth between the Democrats. Manchin, Sinema on one side, the progressives on the other. They're still negotiating it. You know, Pelosi tried to get him to vote on that bill last week before Biden took off to the climate conference, but it didn't fly. Why? Because the progressives, they are controlling what's happening in the House of Representatives, and they're basically saying, you pass this bill first or we're not going to let anything go forward. And folks, it's an unclear at present as to if that's ever going to happen or not. So you're going to see a lot of stories coming out. I mean, the big news today on Joe Biden at the climate conference was he could barely stay awake at the damn thing. I mean, boy, that is embarrassing to the United States. But rest assured, they are going to try to do everything they can to push this monstrosity through. And right now, they don't seem to be getting there. Sure, you've seen blurbs about how Manchin's going to bend on certain things, Sinema's going to bend on some other things. You know, they're narrowing down how they're going to pay for this bill. But rest assured, folks, there's going to be a lot of horse trading still happening. And, you know, the Democrats are trying to make it seem like they're making progress, but I can assure you it's not as easy as they think. And additional things going on. Did you ever think you would see a country where illegal immigrants, get a load of this. This news story broke at the end of last week and was talked about over the weekend. The Biden administration, in an effort to satisfy lawsuits from children separated from their parents, is considering paying up to $450,000 to illegal immigrants. Folks, that's more money than is paid to families of soldiers killed in action. I mean, this is an outrage. And who do we talk about on this show all the time about leading the DHS? That's right, Mayorkas, coming straight out of his department along with two others. Republicans on Capitol Hill are looking for answers. Biden sort of scratched his head when asked about it at a news conference over in Europe. So again, the more insanity, it's just crazy what's going on. I'll tell you the other thing happening, folks, and we always tell you we have to keep an eye on what the news is over the weekend so you don't have to. They're in full panic in the Democratic Party right now. The president's job approval rating came out. This is on a mainstream media MSNBC, NBC poll. 42% approval rating, 57% disapprove. Folks, that's astounding numbers. It reaffirms what we've been telling you, that over the last month, that polling average has been anywhere from 38 to 42%. In addition to that, the people who believe the economy is going in the wrong direction, 71%, folks. That's astonishingly bad numbers. And even more troublesome for the Democrats, they've lost 35% of their own base who believe that the president does not have the country going on the right path economically. So, folks, it's like Peter was saying earlier in the show, whether it's the coronavirus and the implications from that came, out of China. The supply chain disruptions. Peter's background is in manufacturing. He was economic advisor to the president. High inflation rates that people are experiencing. Gas prices. I mean, it was sort of embarrassing. Biden did have to acknowledge that while energy resources are tight, he's having to go to OPEC to produce more energy because of his insane policies here in the United States while they're at a climate conference. It's just astounding. Every single thing these Democrats touch is turning the wrong way. It's not working for them. So, we're going to get a little bit of an idea of how the American public think about this in tomorrow's Virginia election. Now, we've been telling you it's a tight election, which it is. Could go either way, but all of the recent polling seems to indicate that Glenn Youngkin could be leading this thing anywhere from 2 to 3 points. Folks, if the Democrats lose Virginia, bear in mind, Biden won that race by 10 points a year ago. So if Terry McAuliffe loses to Glenn Youngkin in the vote tomorrow, you will see a political earthquake hit Washington, D.C. Because every single thing that is being affected, you talk about problems at the border and the drugs coming across and the inflation rate and the high oil prices and the debacle that took place in Afghanistan on the withdrawal. Now you add in the fact that parents are ticked off about how their kids are being educated. Well, I got news for you folks. That is not going to bode well for the Democrats if pissed off parents, soccer moms that voted for Biden switch up and vote for Glenn Youngkin tomorrow. So keep an eye on that race tomorrow. It's going to be major news come out Wednesday as to what's happening on that, and we're going to be staying on top of it for you. Okay, a couple other things. One thing that we ran out of time with Peter on, but the growing influence of the Chinese Communist Party in this country. Folks, it's happening as we speak. Peter talks about that in his book. So in addition to learning everything you can about the Wuhan virus, behind the scenes with the president, Fauci, the election, what happened in those critical states, you're going to get a good education about the relationship with the Chinese Communist Party and its influence not only in the United States, but around the world. So again, we want to thank Peter for joining us today. So 71% going the wrong way, Biden approval at 42%, showing no signs he's going to do anything to try to turn it around, but we're on top of it for you. We will keep a close eye on those election results tomorrow night coming out of Virginia. And believe me, at a certain point in time, if this thing goes the way we project it may go, Biden's going to have to do a mid-course correction. You cannot keep pulling the country to the left if the rest of the country doesn't want to follow you there, and that's where we're headed right now. Now, will they get some give and take on this bill? Probably, but I can't see any chance that they're going to vote on this by tomorrow. But stranger things have happened. You never know. Again, we want to thank Peter for joining us today from Washington, D.C. Folks, thanks for viewing today. We got a lot more news we're going to follow through with you tomorrow, whether it be the economy, elections, or just the Biden incompetency, but we're going to stay on top of it for you. Thanks for watching today. Have a good evening, and we will see you tomorrow. Hello everybody, Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report. It's Wednesday's edition, and we're broadcasting bi-coastal today from Irvine, California, and from New Jersey. Dr. Michael Busler, welcome back to Schaftlein Report. Happy to have you as my guest on this momentous day.
Well, thanks for having me, Mark. As you know, it's always my pleasure to be here.
Michael, this is literally right up your alley. I mean, today the news hit the tape that the Consumer Price Index rose 9.1% in June, the highest increase year over year in 41 years. Michael, we've had some high inflation. This number even surprised some of the economists. For the benefit of our audience, give us a little background. How did we get here, and what are your thoughts on where we are right now and how to get out of this mess?
Okay, so the first question is, why is inflation so high? How exactly did we get here? Now, the Biden administration will say that it's mostly caused by President Putin's invasion of Ukraine, and that drove up energy prices and some food prices. There's not much they can do about that, and that was a major cause of inflation. Secondly, the administration would say the supply chain issues that we've had as a result of the shutdown due to COVID have not been resolved yet, and that's the other part of the inflation problem. Now, I disagree with both of those. Why is that? They say Putin invasion has caused energy prices to go up. And the logic is that, well, Putin invaded, the Western world is not buying any more oil. That reduction in supply, not getting to these countries, is causing prices to go up. Now, why don't I agree with that? Russia is producing more oil today than they were producing before the pandemic. While it is true, the US, and at least by the end of the year, Europe will stop buying Russian oil, all they did was drop the price a little bit, and they started selling everything to China and India. So in total, the world supply is about the same as it was prior to Putin's invasion. So that's not really what's causing energy prices to rise. Secondly, Biden blamed it on the supply chain. We can't get all the goods there, the shortages. He's trying to do what he can, he says, to fix that. Now, why do I disagree with that? Because as of last summer, the U.S. is producing at a rate that's greater than before the pandemic. So total supply today is higher than it was prior to the pandemic. So while we do see shortages in certain markets, computer chips driving up the price of automobiles and a few other markets, overall, that's not contributing to what's causing the inflation problem. So I disagree with that. So the next question is, well, what is causing the inflation problem? So in my view, there are 4 reasons why we have inflation. Reason number 1, with regard to energy, the Biden administration from day one took action to reduce the supply of fossil fuels because he wants the country to wean off of fossil fuels and onto renewable energy. How does he do that? He restricted the supply of oil and gasoline. How did he do that? He canceled the Keystone Pipeline. He withdrew leases to draw on federal lands. He drew the leases to drill in Anwar province off the coast of Alaska. He added numerous regulations to the permitting process, which drove up the cost for firms to produce. And he told banks, if I was you, I wouldn't lend in the petroleum industry because they have no future. So the reduction in the supply has caused energy prices to go up, and gasoline prices were up significantly even before Putin did anything. So reason number 1, energy inflation. Reason number 2, the federal government has been paying people not to work. How did they do that? People became unemployed. They stretched out the 13 weeks to 26 weeks, eventually up to 52 weeks and beyond. And the federal government added $600 a week to whatever unemployed people were getting from the state. When that ran out, they made it $300 a week. So all people have been able to save much of that money. And as a result, there's less of an incentive for them to go back to work. I spoke with some younger people under 25, and I asked them, listen, you haven't worked in 2 years. Why aren't you going back to work? And they told me, well, the federal government gave us all this stimulus money. The federal government added to my unemployment and let me collect for a long time. I haven't paid rent on my apartment for 2 years, and I can't get evicted because there's a moratorium. And some said, look, I had a school loan, but I haven't paid that in 2 years either. So most of them were saying to me, as long as we have this money and we don't have to work, we're going to stretch this out as long as we can. So business said, to get these people back, I'm going to have to start raising wages up significantly to try to lure these people back into the workforce. And I say, well, it's good for the worker. They're making more wages, which is true. However, it drives up labor costs for business. And since their energy costs are also going up, that's driving up their costs, which are also pushing up prices. That's 2 reasons. The other two reasons, which I think have a greater effect, have to do with the excess demand in the economy. Where did that come from? In the last 2 fiscal years, the federal government spent nearly $6 trillion more than they brought in tax revenue. On a $23 trillion annual economy, dumping $6 trillion in excess demand simply pulls prices up. So the huge government budget deficits have pulled up prices. And fourthly, what I call the shockingly irresponsible monetary policy by the Federal Reserve has caused at least half of this inflation. Why do I say that? Typically, the best measure of inflation at the consumer level is the consumer price index. Before the pandemic, the consumer price index increased by 1/10 or 0.2% per month. So if it does that for 12 months, you're looking at about a 2% annual inflation rate, and that's where it's been prior to the pandemic. In January of 2021, the consumer price index went up 0.3% in January, 0.4% in February, 0.6% in March, 0.8% in April. Clearly, we had an inflationary problem at the beginning of 2021. Usually, the Federal Reserve stays ahead of this. If there's even a hint of inflation, they'll start to take some action so it doesn't get out of hand. Instead, last year in March and April, they said, don't worry about this. This is temporary. What was the word they used? Transitory. Yep. This is transitory, and don't worry, it'll go away. So they kept increasing the money supply by buying $120 billion per month of government bonds, and they buy it simply by printing up money. So you're increasing the money supply. And secondly, they kept interest rates near zero for the entire year. Had they reduced the bond buying program in 2021 and started to gradually nudge up interest rates, we'd have half the inflation rate that we have today. So why do we have the inflation? Supply chain issues are not a major cause, and neither is Putin a major cause. The reason that we have this inflation that we have today, increased energy policies due to Biden's, increased energy prices rather due to Biden's policy, increased wage inflation due to the government paying people not to work, huge government budget deficits creating excess demand, and the president wants to spend even more going forward. And 4, the shockingly irresponsible monetary policy, which kept interest rates near zero and kept expanding the money supply. So those are the 4 reasons. Now, the Federal Reserve is the only one left to really fix this. So now, instead of taking interest rates up gradually, which they should have started over a year ago, now they're going to have to get very aggressive. They raised it 0.75% last month, unheard of in the last 25 years. And they're going to meet in about 2 weeks. They're going to raise it at least 0.75 point. And after this inflation report, perhaps a full 1 percentage point. That's going to cause some additional problems in the economy going forward.
Hello everybody, Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report. It's Wednesday's edition. We're broadcasting from Irvine, California, and from the great state of Idaho. Andrew Crapuchettes, welcome back to Schaftlein Report. I'm looking forward to your analysis today because it was, I don't want to say fireworks were going off on Capitol Hill when Jerome Powell, the Fed chairman, testified, but boy, you could tell the big difference from Republican questioners to Democrats. Andrew, the hot
well,
button.
Thanks for having me, Mark. Always nice to be with you. And what a time to live in America today. There's you do feel like a lot of the information coming out of the media today is just not reliable. And so I'm grateful for your show and the opportunity to talk to people about some of the data that we're actually seeing and what we're seeing on the ground with some of the work we're doing at redballoon.work.
Well, let's talk about that because this hearing was dominated by 2 issues: inflation and oil prices.
Yep.
Let me get your perspective on oil prices. I mean, they've ticked down a little bit here. We're trading around $103, $104 a barrel. That's down $20 in the past week. But Andrew,
Right.
there's a lot more to the story. So share with our audience some of your insight and analysis here, because the headline is not always the main story.
That is the issue. And I think, the Biden administration is talking about a tax holiday, which is actually just a tax discount because they're taking way more than that. But let me give you some stats here. So we're talking about $103 a barrel oil. But if you look at back in 2018, it actually hit $86 a barrel, while gas prices were only $2 on average, $2.30 in the United States. So you're talking about less than 20% higher than it was then, with more than 100% increase in what it actually costs for you and I to go to the pump and fill our car with gas. So there's something, it's not just crude oil prices that are driving these prices. You've got a lot of government taxes that are involved. And honestly, I think the Biden administration, and not just the president, but the whole administration, they want to see high gas prices. They're ideologues on some of the environmental issues, but they're also just pushing for, I think, to crush this economy. And I don't know why they would want to do that, because the two biggest inputs into the economy are labor and fuel, right? Mm-hmm. We need to have energy to get those trucks around, to get farmers tractors, to be able to get the wheat, right? Everything about our economy requires these pieces and parts. And for fuel prices, for crude oil to only be up, call it 20% or less than 20% more than it was in 2018. And then for gas prices to be, I was in Washington State over the weekend and saw $7 a gallon diesel and $7 a gallon premium gas. Well, that will affect how everyone operates this economy, because we require fuel for every single aspect of this economy. So there's more to it than just crude oil prices. We got a nice quote from the CEO of Chevron. He's basically he's like, look, gas prices are really high, but then he kind of goes after the Biden administration, which honestly, you have hard time arguing with him. He says, your administration was largely sought to criticize and at times vilify our industry. These actions are not beneficial in meeting challenges we face and are not what the American people deserve. Basically, seriously, you could just point fingers, or why don't we just try and solve this problem a little bit better? And basically, Exxon is producing more crude oil today than, or Chevron, is producing more crude oil today than any other point in company history. So it's not an issue of big oil getting greedy or being stupid or inefficient. And he says, he goes on to say, a solution requires thoughtful action, to be willing to work together, not political rhetoric. And he just basically says, look, this is going to require a different approach from the Biden administration. The Biden administration has no desire to change their approach. So I would encourage people to look a little bit deeper than just what the administration says about crude oil prices, because there's something more going on here.
Well, your insight is 100% spot on. I'll add a few things to what you said, Andrew. We're producing 1.5 million barrels a day less now than we were when Donald Trump left office. Now, why is that happening? Increased regulation, increased pressure on financial firms before the price spike not to lend to oil-producing companies. You can take everything from shutting down the Keystone Pipeline, which would have delivered 700,000 barrels a day to the United States. That oil could have been refined and utilized. Obviously, the policies, no drilling in Anwar, no drilling offshore. And then the constant criticism up until, well, it really has stopped. When you factor all that in, plus, obviously, prices were as elevated prior to the war in Ukraine. But as we're going to talk a little bit about later in the show, oil is a global commodity.
Right.
And as the global economy recovered from COVID and all the lockdowns, we here in this country are operating now semi-normally. That's not the case around the globe, though. But as economies recover, demand increases. Well, guess what? If you're producing, and globally it's about plus or minus 90 million barrels a day.
Right.
You take 2 million barrels out of the equation, boom, with increased demand. Andrew, this is really simple economics.
Well, it really is. And you look at what the Fed is doing, right? We have this 8.6% inflation. And I would argue that for the rank and file, the people like us, it's actually higher than that, because if you look at some of the fuel and food prices, right. It is crushing to an economy. It's crushing to a household income. And look, this is Biden inflation. This is not, and he's blaming Russia. He's blaming any number of things. And while it is more complicated than just being able to point your finger at one thing, it absolutely is a lot of different factors. I'm one of those nerds that actually listens to the Fed chairman's entire press release and what he's doing. And I love some of the questioning that they got today. But when asked about, hey, do you think you have the tools to fix this inflationary problem? They say, oh yeah, no problem. But you need to understand that prices are based on supply and demand, right? And again, this is where a little bit of economics here, but supply and demand. And so the Fed can throttle demand. They can say, look, there's less money, so there's going to be less projects, less demand for goods and services, but they cannot affect supply. In other words, if you get rid of innovation, you get rid of the Keystone Pipeline, you get rid of some of the ability for America to have fuel self-sufficiency, then those are the things that create supply. The Fed can only control demand. And so what the Fed might be doing right now is raising interest rates so that you have less demand for these things. But if you systematically use regulation and taxes to destroy the innovation that makes America great, you have less supply. And so you will continue to have high prices on things and high interest rates that will actually slow down this economy. So unfortunately, I see a potpourri of bad ideas coming out of the Fed and the administration right now when it comes to our economy.
Broadcasting bi-coastal today from Orange County, California, and from outside the District of Columbia. And we have a very special guest returning, and it could not be on a more appropriate day. Dean Reuter with the Federalist Society. Happy to have you back on Schaftlein Report.
Really great to be with you, Mark. Thanks for having me on the program.
Hey, Dean, the timing could not be any more important. Right after another election day in America, we're in primary season, but there were some pretty significant events that took place last night, particularly in San Francisco, among the most liberal cities in the country, where a George Soros-backed district attorney that came into office 3 years ago on the promise of less jail time, less prosecution, among other things, it did not really work out. They had a recall, and 61% of San Francisco voters recalled their district attorney. Is that a harbinger of things to come? Is the defund the police movement officially dead? Dean, give me your thoughts on last night, particularly what happened.
Yeah, that's a great place to start, Mark. And I should start by saying I'm speaking on my own behalf. I don't represent any organization or its thinkings or positions. But I think the defund the police movement has been dead for some time. Almost as soon as it aired, right. Sensible people began to walk back from the defund the police mantra. And I mean, the polls show that in urban populations, the residents want a police presence. They need a police presence. They need that for a certain quality of living. So they've never been fans, at least polling wise, of defund the police. And the idea of the George Soros, as you mentioned, backed progressive prosecutors, they style themselves as. Some people call them rogue prosecutors, because their model is to run on a platform with an explicit promise not to fully enforce the criminal laws in the jurisdiction to which they're being elected. It's an aberrant notion in the history of this country that somebody would say, I'm a law enforcement official, I'm running to be the top law enforcement official in this area on the promise to set aside these criminal statutes. I will not enforce these. And of course, when you declare that out loud, what you get is a lot of activity in what is still illegal activity, but it's not being policed, strictly speaking. So to me, as a common sense proposition, not even as a lawyer, Mark, this is going to come undone. There's no way at the first opportunity, citizens of any city won't look around and say there has to be a better way. We can say what we will about incarceration rates or about over-policing, but non-policing and defunding the police and just saying we're not going to enforce shoplifting below $1,000 is an invitation.
Right.
To
It literally happened in San Francisco. People were going into stores, smash and grab robberies, and they always kept it under like $900. I mean, it was really insane. But I think
and you can say, Mark, that this is the first opportunity of the voters to refute this regime, but it's really not even the first opportunity. It's an accelerated opportunity when you speak in terms of a recall election. Yeah. So I think when you talk about, is this a harbinger of what's going to happen across the country? I think so. I mean, I think what you'll see before that happens are a lot of progressive prosecutors, rogue prosecutors, mayors, even governors walking back some of their policies, trying to put the cat back in the bag, or whatever expression you want, to try and save their tenure and prevent recalls of themselves or prevent having to stand for re-election in the next election, whether it's this November or next, with a record of lawlessness, really.
Yeah. And Dean, some of the reasons cited were rising property crimes, which were not being prosecuted, homelessness increasing, drug abuse. I mean, San Francisco became like the poster child for this. What used to be one of the most beautiful cities in the country, you walk around, and I've done it because I was there a few times, and needles everywhere. You see people sleeping on the streets. I mean, this is right outside Silicon Valley, where some of the wealthiest Americans live, the glistening skyscrapers, and yet people just said enough is enough. I think it is going to be sending a message out there. And I'll share this with you, Dean. You wouldn't have been able to see this, but last night in Los Angeles, they had the race for mayor, which Karen Bass, who was the original front runner, ended up coming in second to Rick Caruso, a billionaire businessman who has long extensive ties to Los Angeles. Because no one got 50%, those two will be in a runoff this fall.
Yes.
Governor Gavin Newsom, he crossed 60%. Unlikely he's going to be defeated in the fall. Alex Padilla, the senator who replaced Kamala Harris, pretty easy win for him. But the most startling thing I saw, Dean, last night, and again, you had to watch sort of local television to catch this, when Alex Villanueva, the current sheriff in Los Angeles County, 3 people running for the sheriff's job, he ended up winning, didn't hit 50%, so he'll have a runoff again. But when he went to the podium, and they're normally congratulating friends and family and thanking the voters, he railed against George Gascon, who's the district attorney in LA County. And basically, I'm playing his words here, said, San Francisco was first, Gascon, we're coming for you. And I'm thinking, for a sheriff to stand there, local coverage and say that, I mean, that tells you, Dean, how things in the law enforcement community in some of these blue cities have really shifted. Hello, everybody. Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report. It's Wednesday's edition, and we're broadcasting here from Southern California and from the great state of Texas, just west of Austin. Richard Battle, welcome back to Schaftlein Report. So happy to have you back on the show today.
Mark, thank you, and it's our privilege and pleasure to be with you today.
Hey, Richard, we had elections last night, okay, and I don't think there was any surprises in any of them. Give me your perspective on them, because I know you're a rock-solid conservative. You've written books about it. You speak about it. We had a situation last night where we had one Republican defeated, another advanced, and a former vice presidential candidate that moved forward. What are your thoughts on Wyoming and Alaska last night?
Well, I think what's really interesting to me is the misread by the non-Trump faction of the Republican Party. And it reminds me of how the media and the public misread Rush Limbaugh when he came on the scene, and everybody thought that he indoctrinated people when all he did was reinforce what people already believed. And I think there's a same misread with regard to President Trump. I think people believe they follow him when, and in fact, there's millions of people who have believed in American primacy, and Donald Trump has been the candidate who has advanced that. And he's exposed not only the Democrats, but Republicans who are swamp dwellers doing that. And so when we see Liz Cheney last night, her speech, no surprise she lost. The question I would love to know, has there ever been an incumbent beaten as badly as that in a primary in our nation's history? And yet she stood there and basically made the case that she wants to be the presidential candidate for the non-Trump portion of the party.
You know, she clearly has a right to run. I mean, it's not going to shock me at all. My expectations are that candidacy may raise some money, but I don't expect it to go anywhere. We've talked about this on the show many times, Richard. I mean, President Trump is likely to announce that he's going to run. I believe that to be the case. I don't think by any stretch he's going to be the only one to run. I think on our side, we're going to have a healthy debate. I fully expect Liz Cheney to run. I fully expect Mike Pence is going to run. The President Trump, former President Trump, I expect to run. A lot of the other names Richard kicked around, Mike Pompeo, Tom Cotton, Ted Cruz from Texas, Ron DeSantis. I'm not, and Nikki Haley, I could be leaving out some obviously, but I'm not so certain any of those other parties are going to make a move until things sort of settle out with what former President Trump's going to decide to do. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's right. And to kind of add to what I said a minute ago, I think people don't understand that they follow Trump not because it's just him alone, right, but the message. Exactly. And he does not have to be the only messenger for that message. And that message will be there long after he and we are all gone, I believe, because I think the country's ready to move away from the career politicians and people in Washington that are the so-called swamp.
Yeah, and I concur with what you just said, Richard, because, you know, you've heard people say a lot of times, you know, Trump had the right policies. He didn't necessarily have the right demeanor. Okay, people like you and I can get over the demeanor as long as the policies are right. I mean, I'll take that 100 times out of 100 if a guy's got the right policies. I'm not one that really cares what the personality's like. But we have a situation now where, you know, let's analyze a little bit about last night. You know, Liz Cheney, as she stated in her speech, the last time she ran, she got 74%. And now she comes in at 32. And I'm saying, what changed? Well, Liz, what changed is you didn't just like say you were against the president. You became the full throat, you know, speaker of the January 6th committee that, frankly, most people, a vast swath of Republicans have moved on from, and a big chunk of independents have moved on from. When you take positions like that, I don't know how you could expect to be any different. Lisa Murkowski, she advanced as expected. The way, you know, they have that ranked choice voting in Alaska, where, you know, I don't fully understand it, but so I won't try to tell our audience about it. But basically, you vote for 4 candidates, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they rank them. And Murkowski, she easily survived, and she's going to run up against Kelly. I think I'm pronouncing her name, Shibaka. They were separated by like 3 or 4 points. Shibaka is a true conservative along the Donald Trump wing of the party. Lisa Murkowski is what I would deem to be more of a center-left Republican, sort of the, I don't want to call her a traditional Republican, Richard. I think that's too much of a compliment, but she's from the left side of the Republican Party. I mean, I think I'm being generous there. Hello everybody, Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report Wednesday's edition. And folks, we're broadcasting from beautiful Southern California at our studios in Irvine, and we're going to talk a little stock market, economy, with one of the noted experts on Wall Street. Dutch Masters, welcome back to Schaftlein Report. Happy to have you with us today from Carnivore Trading.
Good to see you, Mark. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Hey, listen, Dutch, we were talking a little bit pre-show. Last time you were on, so many of the items that you and I talked about, I mean, they literally came to fruition within weeks and months after what we talked about. You urged people to exercise some caution. You forecast some warning signs. And Dutch, a lot of those things really played out. Now, obviously, we didn't predict the war was going to happen, but notwithstanding, those factors that were creating some of these issues maybe were exasperated by the war, but they certainly weren't caused by it. Give me your analysis about where we are right now, because consumers, Dutch, they're feeling the pinch right now.
Yeah, the inflation is really hitting people, obviously, here in Southern Cal. With you, Mark, we've got, $7 gasoline, and meat prices are skyrocketing, and a lot of the shortages in meat as well. We are starting to see some interesting things happen geopolitically worldwide. There are food shortages taking place, and it's going to hit, Africa particularly hard. We're getting to see riots in Shanghai over food shortages as well. So China's got some problems with respect to feeding their people. I think a lot of people worry about China as an enemy of our state, and I understand that. However, you also have to understand that they're dealing with some very, very large problems in China, that things like not enough women for the number of men that are there, not enough high-paying jobs that are for the people that are growing up and want them, not enough food to feed the people. These are large macro problems that I think it makes a lot of the other things that we talk about with respect to China look very small. So with respect to what we see happening here, we were on Fox Business last week on Tuesday morning and Tuesday afternoon, actually. We had shorted the Qs. I was with Liz Clayman, and I told her, I said, we shorted the NASDAQ on Monday morning. We shorted it again harder on Tuesday. She was a little surprised. Why would you do that? These are the most, highly profitable, best growth companies in the world. Are you calling for value to outperform growth? And my response was probably not as concise as it could be today. We don't really look at the world from a growth versus value standpoint. Carnivore looks at how to make money and in whatever the environment is that we're in, and we take a real sector-specific kind of approach and analysis to things. Obviously, we look at the macro picture. We look at what we call the trading platform every day. The platform is the market. How's the market? What's the platform look like today? Does it look like a good, solid platform for us to trade on the long side today, or is it not so great? So the reality is, we look at sectors. We like the marine shipping sector back in 2020 and 2021. We were early into that sector. That was a pandemic-related type of an issue. The other one was the fertilizer, which is a shortage-oriented trade. So the shortage trades, which are lithium, uranium, fertilizer, and now we did food and agriculture recently. So we were going long, as we were shorting the technology stocks, we were going long agriculture and fertilizer and food stocks. So ADM was a winner for us. Some of the ingredient manufacturers for food, the fertilizer obviously is important, and those have been just amazing. And we recently shut down all of those. Okay, we got rid of the food deal. We took our profits there. We got rid of the fertilizers. We took our profits there. And last night we made our most recent sector call, and it's coal.
Coal.
The dirty little secret that the greenies don't want to talk about.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah, I'm buying into that 100%, Dutch. Talk to our audience a little bit about why you selected coal, because I give my commentary, but go first. Hello, everybody. Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report. It's Wednesday's edition, and we got a little treat for you today, folks. We're broadcasting here from beautiful Irvine, California, and from the Napa Valley in Northern California. Drew, welcome back to the show. Happy to have you with me today, as always.
Hey, Great to be back with you on a Wednesday, not a Tuesday this week.
On a Wednesday, we made a little adjustment, mid-course correction. You had some things going on in Northern Cal. Hey, listen, the big news of the day that came out, and let's really dive into this. OPEC Plus, which includes Russia, Saudi Arabia are the two ringleaders of this group. They're going to cut 2 million barrels per day in production. A lot of analysts thought it was only going to be 1. Drew, gas prices immediately popped above $90 a barrel here in the U.S. Brent's up around 94. Drew, tell our viewers and listeners what this means and how quickly are gas prices going to go up?
Well, it's really substantial. We're seeing it immediately already in California. We're going to see it around the rest of the country, as you pointed out. This is going to hurt Americans. Look, it's important to understand that the reason Joe Biden largely was able to get gas prices down in the first place was, robbing the strategic petroleum reserves, right? He's been kind of pumping out. Well, it's been an average, I think, of 1 million a day or something like that. And then occasionally he'll go in and he'll take out an additional 8 million here and there. That's not a long-term, that can't be managed, because if we keep at this rate and by the end of next year, there won't be any oil left in those strategic reserves. But, Saudi Arabia, there are a lot of wide-reaching repercussions that this is going to have, not only just on America, but this is also going to prop up Russia. Because if you think about what's going on in Russia, their revenue to fund the war right now is coming from oil and natural gas, right? So if they're going to raise the price of gasoline, raise the price of oil, well, that's going to put money in the coffers of Russia. And so, this is a big double-barreled middle finger to Joe Biden from the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. And there's much reason, and I do not blame him for doing this. We can get into those reasons in a minute, but this is the greatest fear for the Democrats going into the midterms, because they have very little things they can point to, of course. Well, they frankly have zero successes that they can claim. The economy, nothing else is going to improve. They can't touch it, can't improve it. So they were really depending upon gas prices, even though it's a lie, right? They're still at their lowest under Joe Biden. They're higher than under Donald Trump. But they wanted to point to that as a campaign message to the low information voter out there and say, look, gas prices have come down under me. It's just a matter of time until the rest of the economy improves, just like we've done with gas.
Yeah, and it's not going to work. And let me give you a little more cynical view of it here. I mean, gas prices in the rest of the country are down. And Drew, you mentioned California. You and I were talking before the show. Folks in California, sit down, listen to these figures. It's going to shock you. Premium unleaded gasoline is $7.09 a gallon, higher in some places. Regular unleaded gasoline sitting around $6.79 right now. Shockingly, you're saying, well, how can it be so high in California? A, we have some refinery servicing that has to be done in the state. B, we have crazy rules and regulations about summer blends and winter blends. Our taxes are higher than any place in the country, but they're going even higher because, Drew, with gasoline now moving back above, oil above $90 a barrel, that's going to translate into higher gasoline prices, and it's going to start happening this week. So MBS and the Saudis are looking at this situation. This is my cynical view, maybe, if you will. They've never got over the fact that the Democrats in particular and Biden really called them out over the Khashoggi situation. Yeah, MBS may have been the guy that ordered the killing, but the United States sort of just pounded it in him, pounded on the international stage. Biden goes over there, gives him a fist bump. They played along for a while, but now the reality is this. Saudi Arabia likes it when there's a Republican administration. They are no friends with the Democrats and their Green New Deal, anti-oil message. Everybody knows it. So the Saudis are saying, this is my cynical view. I'm saying, okay, look, we're 30 days out from an election. What better way to inflict a little pain on the American public than by cutting 2 million barrels a day back? That's going to increase the revenue. And it will inflict some pain on Democratic voters. Democrats are going to look at this and independents, and they're going to say, wait a minute, Biden promised us lower gasoline. Gasoline's going back up. And it's happening right before a midterm election. Well, the other thing, Drew, that happened while those prices came down later over the summer, China locked down. Again, they're sitting there. When you have the biggest oil importer in the world, slowing down its economy on purpose, and they locked down to fight COVID, some insane policies in China, well, demand fell off. So you add demand falling off from China, you add what's happening here in the United States, where we had a situation where the economy started to slow, and now all of a sudden you've got production cuts coming. Drew, that is a recipe for higher gasoline prices. So, yeah, Biden tried to offset the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, taking 1 million barrels a day out of it. That helped the price come down, coupled with China's lack of demand, but all that's getting ready to change. Because one other closing point on this topic, and I'll let you move on. As China reopens, Drew, now you're going to have China increasing demand for gasoline. The supply is constrained. Drew, it's possible, and I'm not predicting this, but it's possible we could see $100 a barrel within the next 2 weeks.
People have to understand, look, none of these people are quote unquote good guys and angels, right? The Saudi Arabians, they're not angels. The Crown Prince isn't an angel, but they're much better than the alternatives in the Middle East, which is like Iran.
Right.
And so Donald Trump understood this. He understood how to play the game. He understood keeping people kind of obedient to us and got along with these people. And Joe Biden has come along and destroyed all those relationships that Trump built over the 4 years of his presidency. Yep. And think about this too. If you're Saudi Arabia, you're fearing a nuclear Iran. Mm-hmm. And Joe Biden, this doesn't get talked about much, but this has been going on since he came into office. He, along with the Russians working on his behalf, are negotiating with Iran. And the truth is, it's to give them a nuclear weapon. That's what this is aimed towards doing, speeding up that process. So Saudi Arabia looks at this administration. They're not safe. This is threatening the stability in the Middle East. And so, of course, they'll do anything they can to punish Joe Biden. I mean, Joe Biden sat there and said, hey, I'm going to make you a pariah, about the Crown Prince. So, look, this is how he talks about people. And look, I mean, North Korea is acting out. The whole world is just a mess right now because of this vacuum in which there is no American leadership.
I think reports out so far, the Russians have lost possibly 6,000 soldiers. That's a big number. That's more than they lost in Chechnya in the entire war. I mean, I don't think this is exactly gone as Putin had planned, during the first week of the invasion.
Yeah, no, to answer, you didn't ask this question, but I'll just make a comment on that, is I think that they were off plan. In other words, they are off plan right now, and it's going to take a while for them to go back on plan. What they did in Grozny during Chechnya was they just utterly devastated Grozny. Did it from afar with rocket artillery, or tube artillery, things of that nature. And then they went in. What they wanted to do here was decapitate the Ukrainian leadership and then actually take over the country. I think that there was a huge intelligence failure that I think the Russians actually thought that they'd be greeted as liberators. And not the only country in the world that's ever made that mistake. I will just say that as you kind of look, to how did NATO get to this point? I would say, one, NATO over a period of time has demonstrated a fair amount of weakness. So many countries, including like Germany, has not provided for their own defense. They've looked to the United States. Even the previous administration, I mean, I think you could say that they went out of their way to warn NATO that they are going to have to take more of a position of defending themselves, because the world is not this wonderful place with everybody looking for peace, and yet they didn't really do anything. It came to this crisis before you see Germany and others upping their defense. So basically, they got themselves in a position by looking weak. Clearly, when they looked at Putin, they, after all those things, I mean, if you look at Crimea and Georgia and Eastern Donbass, and also what they did in Syria, we miscalculated. I mean, you can always take a look at capabilities of a leader, and those you can find, using intelligence. And our intelligence has been extraordinarily good.
Yes.
Knowing the intent of that person is really hard. And we obviously did a terrible job of deterring them.
How do you make a movie about Hunter Biden's laptop, right? So I thought about it, and I thought, and they said not a documentary, right? So it's like, how do you do that? Because just what little I knew at the time, even before I researched it, he's got all these dirty dealings with Ukraine and with China, and it's very complex. In fact, I had a hard time following all the details. And I think that's one of the reasons why they're able to hide so much is in the complexity, right? But nevertheless, it was important material, and it ultimately, showed a corruption so deep in the current presidential administration that it was a story that had to be told. But how can you do that entertainingly? And I realized, first of all, Hunter is a very, how shall we say, he's a Hollywood character, okay?
Yes.
Sure. Because he's a sex addict, he's a drug addict, cocaine addict, right? And he does it out in the open, and he gets away with it, and he knows all these big wigs, and he loves going to strip joints, and he falls in love with strippers and gets them pregnant. So I'm thinking, I hate to say it, but this is a Hollywood movie, right? And
well, in the traditional sense, you would think so, but I bet you didn't go to a whole lot of cooperation when you were back on the left coast.
Oh no, no one would want to be a part of that, right?
Right.
But so I thought, how can you also, another dilemma is, so we realized, and by the way, they also told me right up front, they said, you know what, we don't want to demonize Hunter, we want this to be a good story, and he's a tragic character. And I agree. And I said, a tragic character is someone who's very human. And look, it's easy. The left demonizes the right as being Hitler, and it's absurd, but that's what they do. And I don't want to do the same thing back to them and
right.
just make them out to be these cardboard villains.
You didn't want to be what the left has become.
Exactly. And the truth is, great storytelling, great movies, all do have complex moral characters. So even the hero of a movie has to have character flaws. And sometimes if you're doing a tragedy, which is a movie that more ends in a downside, Othello or, something like that. Or, the movie where the criminal guy like Scarface, gets killed in the end or whatever. You have to show that there is some humanity in that person despite their evil. And that is the point of connection that we all have. If we just say, oh, he's like a Satan, then we don't learn our lessons from the same human nature that is in Hunter Biden is in all of us. It's just at different levels. And we choose to feed the good dog or the bad dog. And that's how we end up becoming who we are, right? And so if we're honest about that, I thought, you know what? Here's a guy who had also a very interesting relationship with his dad and his dead brother. Before his brother died, they had a trio of a relationship. Their mother and sister had died in a car accident when they were young. And so these three, and they came out almost like a mafiosa cliche, where like the father is the patriarch, and Bo was the perfect son who could do no wrong, and he was probably going to run for president, right? And then you have Hunter, who's the F up. He's the guy that he wants to be loved, but and he can't get that love because of his own nature, right? So these were the things that we wanted to explore, and the family dynamics of that family dysfunction. So on the personal human level, that's what we wanted to explore and be honest about it. But then the second difficulty was, okay, we've got that human drama that's going to make it interesting. And then of course, I thought, okay, what about the laptop? How do we make that interesting and dramatic?
Good question. Yeah, I'm sitting here saying, okay, how'd you get through that? Yeah.
And well, so the whole thing was, now this movie is rated R for language and drugs and sex, but there's no nudity in it. But nonetheless, we had to accurately show that world of his in order to make it ring truthful. So we have it on December 2019, which is when the laptop first was found out that it was given to the FBI, and the FBI rejected it, right? So I thought that's where we'll start, because that's the inciting incident that starts the story, so to speak. And I thought, well, what would Hunter do when he found out that happened, not knowing what was going to happen in the future? He thought he'd be depressed, and what does he do? He go to a strip club and coke out, right?
Does his traditional activity.
Yeah. So I actually chose to tell the story through the eyes of a 23-year-old dancer, exotic dancer, stripper, right? and she is a liberal who's a Democrat, but she doesn't really know much, right? And he falls in love with her in one night, right? And then what happens is she discovers who he is and discovers his problem. He confesses it to her. She becomes kind of a confessor for him. And then he then explains to her what's on the laptop. And then that enables us to bounce around in time and space in order to hit all the facts without, if you were to tell the full story, it would be, it would be a miniseries, not a miniseries. It would be a full series,
It
right?
could be a full season's worth of
full season.
show.
Absolutely. Oh, and I would have been awesome to do that, but of course we couldn't afford it. So, and then of course, Joe Biden shows up in the dark SUV and to ask Hunter, I heard they got this laptop. What's going on? Tell me what's on that laptop, or this could hurt my whole election, right? He
Joe Bidenism.
Yeah, he fumbles the words, right? So anyway, that was the way in which we could then, as he explains the story, we bounce around and we're able to show the facts. And the thing that, but there's also something else, because facts can still be boring. I'm sorry, but you want an entertaining movie. So I thought one of the movies that really was a great example to me of telling a complex, otherwise boring details in an entertaining story was the Big Short. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah, sure. Michael Lewis.
Yeah, and that was the one that told the story of the housing crisis and stuff.
Right.
And I love that the snarky humor, that the actors would sometimes talk to the camera, and that was a way that you could jump around a lot and still make things connect and tell an interesting story, but also have a little bit of humor along the way. And that was sort of the genesis of the whole thing.